Oh, hey, Drew.
Oh, Carson, what's up, man?
Just
That's a nice
donning
hat.
the frog hat. That's the infamous Slack emoji.
I feel like we're gonna have a new emoji after that. Had a little frog there too, going along with it.
Well, I've got these little buddies here sitting on my desk too. So I've got a frog and this little rubber duck that just stare at me while I debug errors.
Love it. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to 100x Engineering. Let's see if I can get Carter's spiel right. Where we don't teach you how to become a 1x, a 2x, 5x, 7.5x, 100x engineer. Today is obviously Carson and I, as we have introed ourselves with weirdness. Carson, what's up? How's it going?
Pretty good. Filling in today. Carter is out. I guess he's dropping in the chat right now.
Okay, Carter. Can we say why you're out? We'll wait for him to respond.
Yeah, I think
out of respect.
Wait for a minute.
Yeah, we've got an exciting show planned. Cool topics. I think we're going to talk about UI infrastructure. You excited for that?
Yeah, we've got one of our, trying to remember Noah's correct title, dropping in with us today, who's talking about micro-frontends and that versus like monolithic design.
We can't get right. We got to stay away from the deep topics here. Let's banter a little bit more. And Carter has given us permission to say why he's not here. Carter is abandoning 100x Engineering for the silly thing that he had another child. I feel like that's something, not that important. You could have been on 100x Engineering, but here he is tending to a child of his. I'm just kidding.
Well,
obviously kidding.
Regardless.
I know. Congratulations to Carter.
Congrats, Carter.
Second child. It is awesome.
Second kid.
Yeah. So he will be joining us in spirit and in chat and hopefully in the game, which I'm not going to intro yet. I'm trying to remember the order of things that Carter does. Let's bring on Noah. Do you want to intro Noah?
Sure.
Well, there he is.
Well, I guess Noah's here.
our intro for Noah was that he is a principal software engineer here at JupiterOne, and he paints once a week. Take it away, Noah. How's it going?
It's going good, man. It's a great intro. I was, Drew said, come up with some random fact about yourself. So that was the one I threw out there. I paint once a week,
What kind of painting? Is it like acrylics, oils? Like, what are we talking about?
This class is all about acrylics. So, got this little beauty here I ran upstairs and grabbed. So, behold,
that's
it's great.
You said you were not good. That's legit painting.
That is
good.
That's mediocre.
Yeah. Okay, then I am just off the charts bad if that's mediocre.
Well, it's kind of like running a 5K. You think you're pretty good, and then you get in there, and then you just get smoked by everybody else. So it's kind of like that.
Fair enough.
Like in like a class type setting? Are there other people in there?
Yep. There's typically only like 3 or 4 of us, but we have a good time.
Carter, temporary drawings. Fear not, fellow viewers. Yes, all 2.4 million viewers, do not fear. Carter will be back. Revenge of the Carter will be probably next episode, but we'll get to that at the end of the show. I will do Carter justice, and I will hyper focus on the game we've got planned. If I can mute the tab here, I think we can go ahead and share this. The game is called JupiterOne. It is a first-person arrow-based shooter. Let's see if I can get this link to work right. Can y'all join the link that we were using?
Yeah, keeps kicking us off.
Let me see if I can. Noah, you said that in college you were in art originally, and then you got sidetracked by software engineering. What? Can you tell me like how that happened?
Yeah, and I probably shouldn't use the term sidetracked since that's what I do for a full-time living right now.
A little detour.
Yeah, a little detour. I went into school thinking I was going to be a graphic designer, and then kind of got more into it and realized I'm more into illustration than graphic design. And then one thing led to another. Got a job on campus, kind of dealing with software, and then my boss at the time kind of introduced me to the world of software programming. That's kind of my story.
Did you take any like engineering classes at all in college?
Yeah, I mean, midway through, I basically, full 180, completely switched over to. I think at the time that major was called Management Information Systems, kind of a cross between computer science and business class, essentially. But yeah, that's kind of what got me into this world.
In a coffin? What is this? Halloween theme. I love it.
It is very dark. This is like the last episode of House of Dragon. I don't know if anybody watched that, but the whole thing was just pitch black.
Whoa. We're not about to spoil. We've got millions of viewers here. Yes, I did watch it. That is true.
Man, I can see.
Oh, there we go.
All right. Everyone's in. We're good. This is the most important thing of the show. Yeah, so I guess, Noah, to distract you while we're playing so I can win, unless you're on my team, give us a little detail on what you do here at JupiterOne now that you have pivoted from art to engineering.
Yeah, so I this is really, I just lost my game here. 1 second.
Yeah, that's more important than
that's
anything else.
All right.
What team are you guys on?
I think I'm on red.
Oh, I think I'm on red too. Is that you, Carson? Are you shooting me?
Hints of red on my bow. No, I don't think I've shot anything yet.
All right, I'm back in. Yeah, so I.
Uh-oh, did we lose Noah?
You're cutting out a little bit, Noah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back. You just cut out for a second, then you go back to like full quality. So go ahead.
Might want to get used to that. Okay. Yeah, so I work on a team that's focused on our front-end architecture and platform. So that means I work on a variety of things pertaining to the front end. So whether that's, how our code gets bundled, adopting a new technology or approach, or just like looking into a broken build. It's kind of a wide variety of things. But the thing I tell people is, we're very much unlike a product or a feature team, and in the sense that we're focused on kind of like those underlying layers of the front end platform where, the engineers themselves, like they are kind of our core stakeholders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. So I guess this is a relatively new thing for us at JupiterOne as we've grown. I don't think it's a team or kind of a focus you have in the early stages of an engineering organization, but what is the value of having that group of engineers that are focused on the UI infrastructure piece and having the engineering teams being your end users, I guess?
Yeah.
Where does that add value?
Right. I would give an illustration to talk about the value, So my illustration for this is a restaurant illustration. So, the idea here is, the three of us, we come together and we say, we're going to open up this restaurant, right? We got this idea. And so, we get things going and we're doing everything, right? Like Carson's in the back, making the food. I'm back there with them. We're washing the dishes. We're, getting the food out to the customers. We're, cleaning the tables. We're doing everything, right? But, we get more and more customers, the restaurant's growing, and all of a sudden we start to get a lot of complaints, right? People are kind of complaining that the food tastes like garbage. The tables aren't clean, right?
Carson, what are you doing back there in the kitchen?
Pretty much everything, is going to pot, right? So we got to three of us meet. We try to discuss like what can we do about this, and we start to realize that we're just trying to do too much, right? We need to kind of divvy up things so that each of us kind of has a focus area. And I think that's really the kind of one of the primary drivers with a team like this. It's kind of two things, right? It's focus and it's skill sets. So focus, meaning that, it frees up our feature teams to be able to like focus on customer specific work, while at the same time allows our team to, focus on those underlying layers of the UI platform. Because, one thing I've seen in this role is when all you have is feature teams, kind of those underlying layers that support your UI, they're always going to typically get ignored or they're going to get deprioritized just because, the feature team is meant to get, to fix customer problems. It's meant to get customer solutions out the door.
Right.
And then the other aspect to that is just skill sets, using that restaurant analogy, cooking the food in the back is a lot different than, serving the customers, right? And so each of us kind of has different skill sets, and that same principle applies, when it comes to a team like this. If I ask you to, make our bundle smaller or fix a deployment, right, that requires a much different skill set than if I'm asking you to work on a given feature, for our customer, right? So I think that's another kind of critical aspect, to this team, is being able to get focus or have the right focus and bring the right skill sets.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense actually, because like you said, the core feature teams are not going to, maybe they want to focus on those pieces, but they're going to have product or your customers wanting the features. And those are the things that, you see user facing value to. Although you obviously can make the argument that all of these pieces add that value, just it's not as apparent up front, right? Makes sense to me.
So when I had onboarded, which now I don't know, maybe 8-9 months ago, we were just barely changing some of our spas from being mono repos to micro front ends. So can you talk to me a little bit about those changes?
Yeah, absolutely. So what specifically you want to talk about? Just micro front ends in general?
Explain everything about micro front ends to us right now, Noah, while I kill you with arrows.
Yeah, go on, Carson.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think one thing, as a this is my first dev job, that has been a hot topic, and that I know right when we changed over to some of this different architectural style, was that more people can collaborate on repos and put up PRs at the same time without stepping on people's toes. There's also other costs, about bundle sizes and sharing code and stuff like that. So I guess, what is the core small benefits of micro front ends as opposed to a monorepo architecture?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So first off, for those viewers, I'm assuming everybody that's watching this pretty much knows what a micro front end is at this point. But for anybody that doesn't, right, what is a micro front end in today's landscape? So essentially, it's right. In the old days, we all kind of worked on the same code base. We were all in the exact same repo, right? And what you see is what you get, meaning, we are shipping, that application through one pipeline. It gets deployed out to a given environment, and, that's what the customer sees. That's changed dramatically, last number of years. So now, right, we've basically split up our application into all these kind of, really, they're called micro front ends, right? They're individual applications that you hope are pretty much decoupled from each other, right? And the idea is, you can build, you can deploy, you can test, you can lint, you can do all these things independent, to that application, and then you can essentially, ship those things out based on, your team's needs, right? So if we decide as a team we want to, ship things out, on a weekly basis or a daily basis, we can do that, right? It's our decision, it's our choice. So, I think that's one of the big things that micro front ends brings to the table, is it just kind of, it decouples all of our teams to kind of move at their own pace, and to be able to kind of solve their needs on their own schedules, essentially.
More agile in a sense.
Yeah. But one thing too, I really like about what we've done here at JupiterOne is there's a lot of different ways in which you can.
We lose Noah again.
He's back. Lost him for there you go. We lost your last sentence. You're back though.
Yeah. So I was saying, there's a lot of different ways you can build a micro front end now. So Webpack released something called Module. You guys hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you, Noah.
Module Federation.
Yeah, so Webpack released something called Module Federation, which was kind of cool. I've had, I've dealt with that in the past, and that's something that kind of introduces micro front ends kind of at the build layer. Here at JupiterOne, we use something called single spa, which is happens more at the runtime in the browser, where everything kind of gets stitched back together at the runtime. And I really like that because it's not tied to any given technology or anything like that. Which is really cool, because that means that, as we scale as a company, if we need to bring in a new technology, we decide to use something besides React, we are, we have the capacity to do that, which is really cool. Kind of went off
really cool
there, but
no, very helpful tangent. So we've kind of gone into a little bit of detail of how, you would, we haven't talked about exactly how you would evolve from like a smaller organization setup to a micro front end architecture. Is that something we could kind of go through? Because we've done it ourselves, and it's obviously got a lot of nuances and pain points. Is there a way to safely make those changes? I know we've bumped heads. We've run into a lot of issues. Maybe not too many relative to the process. I think it's difficult. But
application.
Someone's ad playthrough. Is there a way to do this safely? Is there a way to go from like one big kind of monolithic structure to micro front ends without setting everything on fire?
Yeah, that's a tough question.
You just gotta is that just par for the course? You just got to do it.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing there, and honestly, like this goes beyond just, I want to migrate from a monolith to a micro front end, right? Like this goes for pretty much any large scale, engineering project. But like for me, the biggest thing is baby steps, right? I think for the longest time, I always wanted to kind of do things in the right way and kind of just get it right that first time. But the longer you've kind of been in the world of like enterprise applications, these massive applications where you've got a lot of different teams working on a lot of different things, like typically doing everything in one big bang, it's just like, it's not realistic. It's not feasible. And honestly, like most of the time it's like a bad idea. So I would say like my biggest thing is just baby steps, right? So when I look at something like that, I'm going to say like, okay, like this is where we want to be, right? Like, this is where we're at. Like, let's break it up into a series of baby steps where it's like we can slowly, like, make our way towards that type of solution. And I've done that a number of times in the past. And, just because you're taking baby steps doesn't mean that those steps aren't going to be painful. And I can tell you, migrating from like a monolith to a micro front end, it's going to be painful. Like, you're going to encounter things that are challenging, but just kind of par for the course, right?
Sure. See how we can get back in this.
I don't know what's going on with our game here.
I know. I mean,
I'm still in
need to do something.
pending or ready up.
Waiting for squad to start. Searching. Okay, there we go. Search for players.
There we go.
That makes a lot of sense. And we started to talk about some of the challenges that we were, that we would face with this, and some of the problems that we would solve with this. So we've basically established that these micro front end architectures help teams scale because you can have more isolated sections of like your code base or your just functionality in general that different teams can kind of go their own way on, but still maintain some consistency across the board. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's definitely fair. And one thing I didn't mention that I do think is a really significant point when you're talking about micro front ends is like, you really have to have the backing of your organization. So, the first time I met Carter and I met the two guys on my team, and we were kind of talking through like, this is how JupiterOne, deals with micro front ends and stuff. Like I could tell all the way up to, Carter's level, right? There was a level of support there and a level of understanding when it came to like micro front ends. And that's important because it's not just an engineering thing, right? Like when you decide to go that approach, like you're literally talking about changing like the entire way you do business, the entire way you ship code, right? So it's, it impacts your engineers, of course, but like, I mean, we're talking your design teams that impacts, like they need to kind of have an understanding. It impacts like how your customers receive code. So yeah, there's like multiple stakeholders in this, and it's important that kind of everybody's like on board and supports like, that concept. That makes sense.
It does. I'm curious to dig into that a little bit. So like, obviously I can understand how it would affect engineering teams because your workflow is changing. How you deliver code and how you work changes. Product teams, I'm trying to think this through, how it would affect them. I mean, just what do you see that as affecting the rest of the org? Because that's an interesting point. And I agree. It's just a little vague.
Yeah, I mean, one example I'd probably give is like, let's take something like the design system, right? So let's say we have a brand new designer who's joined us, and they have no idea that we, implement micro front end, right? So they're a couple weeks in and they're like, you know what, I don't love our primary button. I kind of wish it was purple instead. I'm gonna make this change. I'm gonna kind of ask our engineering teams, to make it for me, and like, let's get this shipped out. So somebody makes that change and they change the button to purple, right? And all of a sudden in the application, they start to see like, well, half our buttons are purple, but the other half are still blue, right? And that's because, micro front ends, right? Everything's kind of getting shipped at its own cadence, right? So you got some applications that are actually getting deployed while other applications have yet, maybe they're stuck in development or something like that, right? So that's a good, that's a really simplistic use case, but I mean, it's good because it demonstrates the fact that like, not just the engineers need to understand these things, right?
That makes sense.
Somebody at the design level needs to understand it so that maybe they can work with the product teams to say like, all right, let's maybe ship all the products at the same time for this particular release, right?
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Thanks for clarifying that. And confused what team I'm on in this?
Oh, I'm getting
on this guy's team. Oh no, I'm not.
I've got the flag and I don't know where to go with it. I had it and I'm like, I think it's up the ladder. I'm not sure. This map in particular is confusing.
This game is hilarious. Yeah, so that's the main benefit of micro front ends. Really, are there any other benefits? I mean, that's huge. Obviously, having that isolation, that freedom for different teams, if you will. I mean, are there other notable benefits? Or is that really it? Because that's big enough, but maybe there's other things.
Jeez. Keep getting that. I'd say there's a lot of different benefits. I will say, enterprise applications themselves have gotten to the point where they're so big in nature that like by being able to split up things kind of in more, to smaller compartments, I think it makes it easier to kind of like slowly like digest the system over time and like kind of understand what each piece does. I know like with a monolithic app, when everything's just kind of like together, there's no really like clean delineation between each area, and so it's just like everything ends up bleeding together.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, especially as a junior dev coming in. If you just have a small chunk that you're responsible for initially and you have to get into, it's a lot easier than seeing everything.
What about sharing code a little bit? I know that things feel more isolated, and as I explore some code bases and things, it's like easier to understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. But how do we share code across that, like in a micro front end?
Hey, that's a great question, Carson. So we were joking about before this call, right? So yeah, here we've been trying to answer that question, right? So typically most front-end engineers are very well acquainted with, all right, I'm going to share code and I share it by defining my list of dependencies and that package JSON, right? And those listed dependencies typically are, they're NPM packages that I'm just consuming, and they're going to get bundled up into my application, right? So pretty much every front-end engineer is already like well acquainted with that concept. Like they know what's going on there from a sharing mechanism standpoint. One thing we've been starting to explore and kind of go down a different path is like, well, like, do we always have to use NPM packages, right? Do we have to use bundled packages? Could we instead consume things at the runtime, right? So that's something we've been exploring a lot, and we've started to kind of develop a solution around that. And it's an entirely different flow when it comes to sharing. With the front end, there's a lot of different ways that you can share code. There's a lot of pros and cons to each of those solutions. So you kind of have to decide as an organization, like, what works for us, and what can we safely deploy. So when you go runtime modules, it's really great because you can deploy things and they automatically get consumed by, N+ applications, which is really cool because if you've ever been in the situation where you've got, 14, 15 different applications, independent micro front ends, having to go into each of those and like bump up a version of a package and then try to work with the team to get that deployed out, like that's just like such a painful experience. So when you go into like the world of runtime modules, it's, I push something and it automatically gets consumed, at the runtime. I don't have to do that whole version bumping process. So that's one thing we've been, exploring here at JupiterOne, and it's kind of it's exciting because it does solve a number of problems. But on the flip side, it comes with its own set of cons that we have to be aware of.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying if you were to ship some issue.
Right.
Instantly updates everywhere. But yeah, that's a good explanation. I guess the answer is it's nuanced, right?
It's very nuanced.
What you're trying to share. You have lots of options, and they all are not perfect for one given thing. So,
and I think one thing I'll point out too is like, as a front end engineer, I remember like you're kind of hammered with like, dry, right? Keeping your code dry. Like you shouldn't be repeating code. And that's a yes and no when you enter into the world of micro front ends, right? Like the whole point of micro front ends is to decouple your teams so that they can kind of move at their own paces and deploy, at their own will. So every time that you decide to share code with another team, you are coupling yourself more and more with that team or another team, like depending on what you're sharing, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to be cognizant of that, and you always have to ask yourself, like, is this thing worth sharing, right? And a lot of times that just comes down to complexity, right? Like, how hard is this thing to actually duplicate among 5 different repos, right? Like, are we shooting ourselves in the foot by doing this? Like, is it going to be really hard to maintain? And you got to think about things like performance, right? Like, if I duplicate it across the repos, is the consumer now having to pull down a much larger bundle? So there's a lot of things that go into, deciding like how something gets shared, like should it be shared, where does it live? And so that's really, one of the focuses of our team has just been trying to kind of nail that down and then provide guidance to our feature teams on kind of how that should work. I'll get off
that. Nice. Almost like we should have a decision tree or something like internally to help make those decisions.
Right.
Yeah. Would be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the game here. I might refresh
I can't get in either. Let's see here. So I'll ask this as a junior, Noah. A lot of things about CJS and ESM are a little bit new to me. So how important is it that I like understand as a regular front end dev how these micro front end things work, and like what depth of knowledge should I have even to be working in an environment that uses that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like, does everybody need to have like this in-depth understanding of your architecture? No, I don't think that's the case, right? But I am a really like firm believer that like you'll have a stronger and healthier like infrastructure if your engineers, the people that are using it, at least like understand kind of like those critical pieces of it. And it's beneficial not only like okay, a bug occurs and there's all there's more than one person can figure it out, because that I hate when that happens. Like something happens and it's like there's only one person in the organization that can figure this thing out. All right, like that's a really bad sign that things haven't been communicated properly, right? But even more so, I think it's really valuable when you're trying to develop new solutions that need to fit into your pre-existing infrastructure, right? It's hard to make the right decision, for these critical pieces of code if you don't understand the existing landscape. And you'll see that like all the time with, it doesn't have to be front end, like you're talking about back end, everything, right? If you don't really understand like what's currently there and you're trying to develop a new solution, like there's a good chance you're going to like develop something that's just really not going to fit, appropriately. So yeah, I think, if you have that high level understanding, it can just help you to develop those solutions that are really geared at being good for the entire system, and they're not just focused on the particular solution that you're trying to solve for. I've yet to get into the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gonna let us back in here. Just seems
I think we're waiting for more people to be playing, I think.
Maybe our 2.4 million viewers crashed the servers for this game. Some games just can't handle 100x engineering. I might try and make a new one.
Should we try? Yeah, I was gonna say.
I'll just make a new squad and we'll post it out. So yeah, I agree with that, Noah. I think a certain level of magic is appropriate. I don't think everyone needs to know the nuts and bolts because it's just a lot. These are complex abstractions, right? It's not so straightforward all the time. But it's a little too much magic and it's terrifying. So,
and this is why also like I'm a big proponent of documentation and just spending the time documenting things. Like, you know, as engineers, we want to build things, we want to fix things, but like we get to that point where it's like, you know, okay, I need to write my test. I need to like thoroughly document this thing, and I think sometimes we fall short there. So I really like, you know, push myself, push our team to kind of like create that documentation because, you know, it's not only useful for here and now for me to be able to share this stuff with you, but it's also really beneficial because like you never know when somebody's going to leave or when somebody new is going to join, and so you want to be able to kind of take them into these different areas of documentation where it's like, hey, you want to understand how that thing works? Like, come read about that here and kind of get educated, right? Because if you find yourself constantly having to explain the same concept or principle like over and over again, like that's a pretty good sign that you're not doing a good enough job of like communicating, you know, to the engineers how things work.
Yeah, that makes sense. How is this guy in the water with the flag? The water is way too cold. Oh, he's on my team. So we've talked obviously a good bit about UI infrastructure and kind of in relation to micro front ends. We've talked about some of the problems that these micro front ends, I guess, help with regards to UI infrastructure. What else? I guess what aspects of UI infrastructure should a 100x engineer be aware of? It's the question we have written down. I don't know.
So I literally lost the last 10 seconds there. You might need to
you lost the most important part. What aspects of UI infrastructure should a 100x engineer be aware of?
There we go.
Still didn't get it?
What? Say it one more time. Sorry, it keeps cutting out. What aspects?
It's such a dumb question too. You're making me ask it 3 times. What aspects of UI infrastructure should a 100x engineer be aware of?
Oh man, that's a good question.
So those like broad categories, I guess.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, I think it's important to kind of figure out like like when we say UI infrastructure, like what does that even mean, right? And I would say it's going to mean different things to different people and to different, you know, organizations. But for me, like, you know, I'd say like there's a couple of categories that the UI infrastructure consists of. So there's like, you know, maintenance, right? So how do I keep things up to date? So that's like, you know, how do I keep my versions up to date? You know, I need to be removing dead code. How do I identify those things? There's the performance piece. You know, how do I ensure that our applications are fast, reliable, and like, how do I make sure that they like stay like that? So that's things like bundle sizes and shared dependencies. There's the monitoring and visibility piece. So like, you know, how do we ensure that we know what's going on across our UI? So that could be like error handling and issues with version discrepancies. There's the build and deployment piece. So, you know, we have to, you know, it's good to understand like how our code gets built and deployed out. There's the design piece where, you know, we're talking about actively maintaining and scaling the needs of our design. So that's typically, you know, we're talking about the design system and the components associated with that. And then for me, one of the big pieces that I kind of find myself talking about a lot is just like the scaling piece, right? Like, how do we share code amongst each other? You know, what we talked about previously, you know, as our application grows, you know, that becomes more and more of a kind of a critical piece of, you know, something that we have to talk about and something we have to figure out just because you constantly find yourself in that situation of like, okay, hey, these two teams need to share this thing. Like, how do we do this appropriately? What's the best way? So yeah, those are kind of some of the core areas: maintenance, performance, monitoring, you know, builds, deployments, design, and scaling.
Really like those categories. And so micro front ends probably fall into the scaling, and I guess actually probably most of those categories, except for maybe design. Probably even then you could work them into design somehow.
Right. Yeah. I feel like I have.
Okay, I've got the flag, and I have no idea where to go with it.
Wait, what team are you on?
Well, I had it. I just got shot on top of a church, I think.
Oh, that was me. I was shooting on the church. all of our viewers saw that happen. Okay, I'm on the other team then. It's hard to tell.
I'm not sure which color I am.
You are on blue team.
Look, thanks, Drew.
Is that you, Carson?
I'm standing in the garden right now.
Okay. Well, I just killed somebody. We both had the opposite flags. This thing is very janky, which is on brand. Yeah, so actually, I'm fresh out of things to talk about with micro-frontends. What else should we talk about?
I mean, I'll go all day.
I know you will. We've got probably 5-ish minutes left. We talked about a lot of good stuff.
One thing that we had talked about was bundling dependencies a little bit, and something I think that had come up was like breaking changes. So, like, what risks or how would you, with runtime modules, make those changes with like shared code safely?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of one of the things, because we're kind of exploring new territory there when it comes to sharing code. I think there are companies out there that are kind of trying to find an alternative to, your typical bundled package, NPM, installing it through your dependencies and package JSON. But, when you get into something like runtime modules, it does kind of open up a can of worms in terms of like, okay, well, we solved the issue of, I can just deploy this thing out and it's immediately consumed by all my applications. That's great. But what happens if I introduce a breaking change, right? Like, I clearly don't want that to go out to all my applications at the exact same time. And now I've, just broken things, right? So one of the things that, we introduced was this concept of breaking interface change. So essentially, if I am exposing out a runtime module, I would explain it as like, I'm kind of almost like taking a snapshot of the interface the first time I deploy it out. And at that point, it's locked in. So if I, as an engineer, come in there and I try to make some sort of change to that module that's going to break that interface or change that interface, we put something into place that will actually it'll prevent you from doing that. So you have to figure out a way to make that backwards compatible, so that essentially you can't deploy out breaking changes. So that's kind of one of the ways that we've dealt with that. And another thing that we're currently exploring is like, okay, well, if this thing is being consumed at the runtime, right, it's not a physical part of my application. Like, now I need to figure out a way to test that too. And that's something we're still kind of investigating now. But it's like everything, right? Like, it's not the end all be all. Like, we have solved everything related to sharing code. Like, we have solved a number of issues, and I think it's a really cool solution, but it does come with its own issues that we have to figure out remedies for.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of these discussions are so it depends that you can just go in circle. Well, in this case, it's good. In this case, it's bad.
Right.
So it's just to understand that they're powerful tools and there's trade-offs for all of them. And I guess there are some underlying things we've touched on, like to have good documentation, to have good cross-team discussions about the changes you make, to be open about it, have everyone know a good bit about it. It's probably a good thing, no matter what you're using.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it right there, but I think one of the biggest things that a team like this can do is just being really like communicative, really like getting the word out about like, okay, if you're working on this solution that you want all your engineers to implement, well, like, make sure that they are aware of that, right? Make sure they understand like how it works. Make sure you make it clear, like, why is it actually important to them? Because like, future engineers, like, they've got their own priorities, right? They're trying to ship code, they're trying to get stuff out the door. Like, so like, I always try to like really make sure that I'm cognizant of that. And just kind of respecting the fact that everybody's got things that they're working on, right? So you have to be careful in how you communicate, these UI infrastructure changes that you want teams to deal with. It's, if you overwhelm people with too much, they're just going to stop listening, right? And so for us, we've discussed this as a team quite extensively, just trying to arrive at that, like how much is too much and how much is just right enough in terms of like, communicating to our teams.
For sure. All right. Well, Noah, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. I would be way more scared of micro front ends than I currently am without you. So happy you're here.
Happy to be here.
Do you want to, I don't think you do, but do you want to share any links with our vast audience? Do you have any like Twitter, GitHub? You want to make yourself famous, or you just want to?
None that are worth sharing at the moment.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
No Instagram influencer, nothing like that. No.
A couple million followers, and you'll be famous in no time.
Right.
It's fall time. I'm seeing all the Instagram people with their huge hats and laying in the leaves and getting their pumpkin spice lattes and get those right followers.
Right.
I can only not going to go off on a tangent, but I could picture Noah pulling that off for sure.
Means a lot.
All right. Well, guess we'll be seeing you. Don't know how to. Carter normally sends people off. See you, Noah.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Thank
Sweet.
so
That
much,
worked.
Noah.
That was awesome discussion. And it felt great to be the one sharing my screen so I could dominate the game. And Carter had to make it known. Every time I've beaten him in a game, he hides it.
I have a hard time with like trying to navigate the game and be part of the discussion, especially when I don't know all the mechanics of the game.
Yeah. Well, that's what we do here at 100x Engineering. Doing the impossible.
Every other week.
We need to rate the game, the jankiness of the game. Which I actually want to hear what you think first.
Out of 10?
Yeah, it's either out of 10 or it's just an arbitrary jankiness phrase.
Well, I'm not very keen on like the first person shooter type anyway. So I'm not very well versed in that gameplay. But I thought it felt pretty well developed and that there's like I couldn't walk through walls. I could walk through other characters. That was kind of janky.
A little janky for sure.
Yeah.
All right, we'll give it a moderate janky.
Moderate.
Good 7.5 probably. I don't know what the points mean. All right.
We'll
looks
have to
like
establish some sort of rating system.
When's our next episode, Carson?
It is on. I don't know if that is correct. The 11th.
That is not correct.
That is today.
Our next episode is probably in about 2 weeks. We will definitely get that out to all of our viewers.
In 2 weeks' time.
I don't think we have anything else.
Any other announcements? I don't think so either.
No.
Well, thanks for letting me fill in today, guys.
No, it's
Carter,
an absolute pleasure, Carson.
Thank you for letting me fill in. Drew, I talk to you every day, but it's always nice to spend time with you anyway.
Likewise. And apparently our next episode is October 25th. Tuesday, October 25th. Good to know. Exciting. Well, this has been Carson and Drew with 100x Engineering. Are we going to do our sign? You know how to do the sign off?
I don't know the sign off. I know it.
And you have to do the finger guns. I know Carter will be happy if we steal it. And
this way.
Goodbye.